Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight, guys. There's over 100 of you now who are involved in this webinar, which is great. Really wonderful to get to talk to you about the Charity Works program this evening. So the session is going to take around about an hour, and because of the nature of speaking to over 100 people, it will be particularly one-sided, I guess. It'll be mainly me talking about the program, but you will have an opportunity to ask questions and to get involved with the Q&A at the end, which Freya is going to facilitate in the chat box. So probably introductions are the first things that are in order. So my name is Craig, as you probably gathered already, and I manage the campus recruitment campaign for Charity Works, which means that I spend a lot of time at universities and working with career services to try and engage students who have a really keen interest in the non-profit sector and have a really strong interest in wanting to make a social change in their careers. So we're also joined tonight by Freya, who is actually a current Charity Works trainee, and she's going to be managing and moderating the text chat and also the Q&A session. So Freya is a current Charity Works trainee who actually works for Charity Works. She's an executive assistant for our chief executive, Rachel, and yes, she's on this year's program, so she started in September time. So great person to follow up to ask any questions because she's got a great experience of the program to date. So it's probably worth me going over what we're going to be talking about this evening. So what I first want to do is to give you a little bit of insight into the nonprofit sector just to start, and then we're going to be talking about what the Charity Works program is. Some of you may have already been on campus and spoken to somebody, so many of you will have no doubt already had a look over the website, but we're just going to go over what Charity Works program is, what a particular role, job, or more accurately, a placement is like on the Charity Works program. We're also going to talk a lot about the leadership development component of the program because it's extremely important. Charity Works is about developing emerging leaders and bringing talent into the nonprofit sector to really have an impact on some of the UK's biggest social issues. So the leadership development component is so important to that. So we'll be going over that as well. And then we're going to move on. You might be able to see my mouse here. I have no idea if you can, but at least you can, if you can draw attention to this in the middle, which is that we're going to talk about the recruitment process as a whole. And probably why a lot of you are here is I'd like to go over some application support tips as well, just so that you can make the most of the application process itself. So please stick around for that, really important. I'm also going to talk over a little bit about assessment centres as well. They may seem a little far away, but they soon fly about if you are successful through the application stage. So really useful, and actually really useful assessment centre tips irrespective of whether or not you get to that stage on the programme. They're quite sort of generic and really, really useful. And then we'll move into the Q&A portion as well. Where you can basically ask questions. What I would encourage you to do is to ask questions as we go. And Freya will signpost you as to whether or not I'm actually going to come on to a point later, in which case she'll tell you to hold your horses. And if not, she'll try to answer the questions as thoroughly as she can in the time given. We do have a lot of people here tonight. So what I indicated in the joining instructions email was that anything that wouldn't be that isn't answered tonight because potentially it just gets missed in amongst the questions, you will receive a follow-up email with a full Q&A probably sometime next week. Yep, and then at the end of the session, some of the most commonly asked questions we're going to pull out, and I'm going to talk you through some of them with the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes of the session to go. So with that in mind, let's start the presentation by talking about the non-profit sector as a whole. So whether it's rising inequality, aging population, climate change, so many of these key issues are affecting the UK. They are some of the biggest pressing social issues. One of the key things we're looking for candidates on the Charity Works programme are people with a passion to want to make a social difference. It's becoming an increasing issue, particularly in the past sort of 3 or 4 years. It's definitely something that is really important and at the forefront of people's minds, very topical. So now more than ever, the UK needs committed people to work on solving these issues. And essentially what we want to do through Charity Works is to be able to support people who want to build a career for themselves while becoming brilliant social leaders. So the whole ethos of the program is asking whether you could build a career changing the world for a living. So one thing I am going to start with is, whilst the text box is alive, or it was the last time I had a look at it, and yes, it is very much still alive, I want to ask what words you associate with the non-profit sector. And I just genuinely want you to type those into the text box. Just throw a few words out there that you think of when you're thinking about non-profit sector as a whole. There is a little bit of a delay from what I say to what you receive. So you're probably doing that now, but I'll not be catching up with it for maybe it's around 30 seconds or so. But let's see if we can get some people to contribute in that text box and just think about what those keywords are you associate. So I'm starting to get some through now. Social change. I love that social change is the first thing that somebody said. Low budgets is also a very fair thing. So working to tight budgets, very much so. Yes on charity work. Oh, there's loads of them coming through. So I'm trying my best to keep up. Fundraising. Yes, very good. Yep. Social justice, ideals, helping others. Fantastic. Okay. You guys are very good at this. This is good to see. So I'm going to put some of them up on the screen, and I am going to minimize the chat box so I don't get distracted by all the fantastic suggestions coming through. So often people will associate words like fundraising. That definitely came up. So did charity. Other people think of volunteering, campaigning. Often people think of the nonprofit sector in terms of operational roles and delivering frontline services to beneficiaries. And some people think of specific causes, whether that's international development or poverty. Some of the other words that people may associate with the nonprofit sector, but often don't, are some of the more corporate functions, particularly thinking about business development, project management, HR. Some people do think of policy and research, particularly where there's quite a very fine line between what's going on in the nonprofit sector and overall government policy. Some people think of marketing, public relations being a huge one, and charity comms being really important at the moment. You've probably seen quite a significant amount of press over the past sort of year or so with regards to issues in charity comms. And there's also finance and legal issues. But I think the point that I want to get at is actually that the nonprofit sector is really, really diverse. And in terms of the kind of career that you can build in it, it's a great place to cut your teeth, whether or not there is sort of like a key interest in some of the areas that you think when you often associate with the nonprofit sector or not. And actually, they are all geared towards social change. One slide that I've taken out of this, which I thought that was the next slide, was actually all of these feed into social change in the middle. So well done to those who are thinking about social change. The idea is that essentially you can build a very professional career in the sector, but at the same time be able to have a social impact and make a difference with your career, essentially getting paid to change the world for a living. So let's talk a little bit about the CharityWorks program itself. So CharityWorks is a graduate level entry route into the nonprofit sector. And I think what's so incredible about CharityWorks is actually that a graduate level route into the sector is quite challenging to find. There are ways and means of getting jobs in the nonprofit sector. Often people volunteer first. Often people will go for an entry level role. But CharityWorks is really unique in being a graduate scheme specifically for the nonprofit sector. On CharityWorks, you're taking part in a full-time 12-month job working at one of our partner nonprofit organizations. And before you all pounce on Freya and ask what those organizations are and what they look like, I will be coming on to that in a moment. And it is also an acclaimed 12-month leadership development program, which includes a number of different aspects to it: mentoring, peer learning, research assignments. And again, I'm going to go into those in a little bit more detail in a few moments. So this is just to give you a broad overview of the program as a whole. So let's think about the actual placement. So a couple of words are on here: job and role. You will have a specific role, but it's quite hard to talk about what that role may be without talking about placement matching, and we'll talk about that in a moment when we think about the recruitment process. But essentially, you would be a CharityWorks graduate trainee and have a job title within the organization that you work for. You would work for one of our CharityWorks partner organizations. We have placements across England. I actually believe we have some in Scotland this year. I could be mistaken. Let me try and follow up with you on that one. But we're definitely looking UK-wide. So we have placements in the southeastern London, in the southwest, in the northwest. We have somebody working in the northeast actually this year. So quite a lot of variety in terms of location of placements. Again, we'll talk about location in a few moments' time. The roles are typically 9 to 5 roles with some flexibility according to the requirements of the placement itself and the host organization that you're working in. And the contract is fixed term for 12 months. The program is now open for people to apply for commencement in September 2017. A little bit more about the fixed term placement in a moment. So in 2016, we placed around about 140 trainees across just over 80 organizations. And the employers that we work with, this is just a very, very small sample. We couldn't fit all 80 plus on the screen. So here is just a taster of the kind of organizations that we work with. So whether these are employers like the National Housing Federation, the oversight body for social housing in the UK, moderately sized charities, the smaller charities like the LGBT Foundation, big organizations, children's charities like the NSPCC, to organizations like Royal Trinity Hospice, Minds, the mental health charity, Action on Hearing Loss, other major housing associations. Basically, the breadth of the placements and organizations that we work with cover everything from housing, social housing, to mental health, human rights, international development, support for young people, support for people and children with disabilities, and many, many more. There may be a particular area that interests you, and potentially that might pop up in the Q&A, but that's just to give you a general overview of some of the organizations that you could be working at or that we've worked at in the past. So before I go any further about CharityWorks as a program, one of our program managers, Daisy, will love me for talking about her, I'm sure. On the CharityWorks program, as well as having your placement supervisor, who is essentially your line manager at the organization that you work for, you would also have a program manager from CharityWorks, and you would be sorted into cohorts. So groups of around about 20 to 25 trainees working in a similar location to where you are, and it's your program manager that delivers many aspects of the learning and development program. So just a quick word about Daisy, who's one of our program managers. She was a CharityWorks trainee herself way back in 2010. She has worked for St Mungo's for around about 3 years before becoming a program manager on CharityWorks. And she stated when we asked her to talk about the program and wanted her to contribute something to tonight's discussion, she felt that CharityWorks was an unparalleled opportunity to start out in the nonprofit sector, to develop your existing skills, explore what's happening now in social change, and also to build a powerful network to help you have an impact for the rest of your career. And we're going to drill down into that in a little bit of detail in a few moments' time when we talk about the leadership development program in particular. So that's Daisy. So let's think about the kind of role that you could be doing on CharityWorks and what your placement could look like. So some of the roles that we have are frontline roles, what we like to think of as operational roles. So these are the kind of roles where you have a face-to-face impact with beneficiaries, or you're working at that sort of line between the organization and the people that you're trying to serve, whoever your beneficiaries may be. So that could be anything from volunteer management, so supporting and managing a team of volunteers, to working directly with service users on problems that they may face, identifying unmet needs in service provision within the charity that you're working at. In terms of other roles that you could be taking on, that could include a research and policy role. These are incredibly popular when we talk about them on campus. So that's conducting and writing research reports, conducting data analyses. Often it could be preparing a briefing or public statement. Sometimes these roles fit within that fine line between government policy and what the charitable organization that you're working for is doing. So preparing responses to government consultation and analyzing data confidently. So those are the types of things you could be doing in a research and policy role. There are other types of roles as well, some that are quite corporate in terms of HR and internal comms. So whether that's working to develop and maintain practices for internal staff within a non-profit organization, or delivering or evaluating internal comms strategies to share what you're doing, sharing the impact of the work that you're having internally. It could be supporting management of staff or delivering and managing and attending training. So that's more of a corporate role. We also have external communications and campaigns roles. So that could be developing and delivering public campaigns. So if you are part of the public face of an organization, sometimes that could be working in digital communications or in other lines of media. You could be trying to raise a charity's profile. You could be managing their social media outlets. You could be promoting a cause through public relations, potentially working with external media sources like national media and national media campaigns, as well as producing case studies and promotional materials. So we have some exciting roles in comms and campaigns. And another line of area that you could work in would be business development. So that is working within the charity, working externally so that you are building relationships either with external corporate organizations or with other charities. The non-profit sector is a hugely collaborative sector. So working with other charities is something that is quite common to see. So you might be supporting the income streams that an organization has. You might be working in fundraising. You could be trying to develop new business to try and maximize the profile of the organization that you're working for. Delivering fundraising events and organizing those events, hugely important. Somebody mentioned in the chat box earlier, actually, having limited budgets. And actually, I think that the nonprofit sector is a great place to kind of hone your talent in that because of the challenge of often having to deal with quite restricted budgets. So roles in fundraising, really, really popular in that respect. Yeah, and so from that gives a kind of broad overview as the kind of job that you could be doing within a business development or fundraising role on the Charity Works program. So that's the roles in general and some of the organizations that we work with. That'll have no doubt piqued your interest, and probably you've started asking questions of Freya already. Although I have kind of looked away from the chat screen, so I'm just having a look. And yes, it seems very much alive. I hope it's all going well in the chat box, Freya. So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit before we move on to the recruitment process and talking about things that could support your application. I'm going to talk a little bit about the leadership development program because it is such an important part of the Charity Works program. So alongside your placement, your 12-month placement at your organization, you will take part in an ILM endorsed leadership development program. So this program, the whole point of the program is to give you an overview of some of the key issues that are affecting society that are being faced by the nonprofit sector, and also to help support you in your day-to-day role, whilst also giving you the chance to develop skills, knowledge, and networks for your life and future career going forward. What I would say is that although the Charity Works program is a 12-month program, I would say that firstly, in terms of the statistics, within the first 5 years that we ran the Charity Works program, out of those that were looking for a graduate level employment at the end of the program, in the first 5 years, 100% of people found work at a graduate level placement. And actually 2/3 of them remained with their placement organization that they work for. So that is quite common to see. But either way, depending on how things go on your placement, you're also completing a leadership development program that gives you a well-rounded understanding of the nonprofit sector as a whole and some of the skills and experiences that you'll need to be able to further your career in the nonprofit sector as an emerging leader. So how does that work in practice? Well, it's a mix of self-directed learning and group work, and it covers everything from, and I'm going to go through these in a little bit of detail in a moment, that's impact research, peer coaching, mentoring, attendance at national conferences, and peer learning sessions. So let's talk a little bit about what that means in practice. So impact research is an opportunity for you to conduct 2 really detailed independent pieces of research that are going to have an effect on either the placement organization in which you're working or more broadly on the third sector. So to give you a great example of that, one of our trainees from last year was working for the National Housing Federation, and she completed a piece of independent research that was basically putting together how social housing would react in the wake of the decision for the UK to leave the European Union, so in light of the Brexit vote. And she's delivered that now at a number of key events, key policy events to a wide-ranging audience, and that's become part of the National Housing Federation's policy on how they take that forward. So what we encourage our trainees to do with their impact research is to really it's a real opportunity for you to set your mark in the sector and to produce something that is going to have a real tangible benefit for the organization that you're working for. Great experience. As well as that, I talked a little bit earlier about how you would have a placement supervisor, which is basically your line manager at the organization that you work for. I also mentioned that you would have a program manager, somebody like Daisy, who would essentially manage you on the program and be a point of contact for support and also deliver some of the learning sessions, which we can go on to in a moment. But as well as that, there's a third person that you would have contact with, and that is your mentor. So each trainee is matched with a mentor. And the idea of having a mentor is that it isn't somebody within the organization that you're working with. And this is to give you a much broader perspective and for you to think about your career aspirations and goals moving forward. So many of the mentors will be emerging or senior leaders within the nonprofit sector and beyond that. Some of them may be professional coaches and they may be giving their time over pro bono. But essentially, you will meet with your mentor 6 times throughout the year for confidential one-to-ones. And it's a really great support. I mean, today is, I can't remember the name of what today is, a National Mentor, it's something to do with mentors. Somebody's going to tell me in the box in a moment. But we're always working very closely with mentors. They are incredibly important. We have around about 130 mentors working with us on CharityWorks, and they are a line of support for you in terms of developing your career and getting that support that you need to become an emerging leader in the nonprofit sector. So mentoring, very important part of the CharityWorks Leadership Development Program. We also have learning sessions that take place throughout the year. These will be led by your program manager. So essentially, you'll come together with a cohort of trainees. So you'll be placed in a cohort of around about 20 to 25 trainees. Think of them as your kind of class. You will meet with them on a regular basis throughout the year, and you'll take part in learning sessions that are really designed to develop your professional skills in the sector as a whole. So actually, they are universal, irrespective of the role that you're performing. So regardless of what charity you're working for, non-profit organization you're working for, and irrespective of the kind of role that you're doing there, whether it's policy, whether it's communications, you will be taking part in these universal peer learning sessions, which are essentially giving you insight and aspects of the non-profit sector, giving you support with that, irrespective of where you're working. And they take place throughout the year. I believe there were around about 6 or 7 of them last year. So I'll confirm that with the program manager in terms of how many they are, and we can put that out in an email. As well as the peer learning sessions, there is the opportunity to take part in peer coaching. So this is where you'll be allocated a peer coach throughout your time on the program, which is another trainee who you will meet with regularly to provide one-to-one coaching and support. So essentially, you're going to get support and training to become an effective coach, and coaching is a skill that we highly value. And you're also going to get the opportunity to be coached by your peer coach as well. It's great to have that mutual one-to-one support network as you go through the year. So yes, our trainees speak very, very highly of the peer coaching process, really important part of the program too. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of the leadership development program is your chance to attend national all cohort conferences. So this is when all trainees come together from across the UK and basically will take part in national conferences where you'll get a real opportunity to speak to some key senior leaders within the nonprofit sector, to network with other people, to think about what's going on in other charitable organizations, how you can support one another on the program and with the work that you're doing. It's a really great opportunity for you to be thinking about network building. And Network building to some is a bit of a dirty word. It sounds a little bit sleazy. It's one of those things that you kind of feel like you do on LinkedIn from time to time. But actually building networks is about collaborative working. And if we're ever going to solve some of these big social issues that we will be dealing with and that you will be dealing with on the Charity Works program, then we need to work as organizations and as individuals and as teams together to do that. So really great opportunity for you to do that. So that's essentially the leadership development program in a nutshell. And just to make sure that I'm keeping up to date with things, I'm just checking through the chat feed. So yes, to follow up on what Freya is saying, the Charity Works program does not lead to an accredited ILM qualification, but the program, Charity Works itself, is endorsed by the Institute of Leadership and Management. Yeah, I don't want to follow up in any other questions. I don't think at the moment, because I think Freya is on top of those, but I'll try and catch up with some at the Q&A at the end. So what I want to do next is to move on to, actually, before we do that, let's talk about one of our trainees. So I've given you a program manager's perspective of Charity Works, but this is Femi. So Femi was on the Charity Works program in 2014. He worked for Age International UK, where he was involved with policy support. He's now working for the UK Faculty for Public Health, where he is a policy officer. So he works very closely responding to and preempting what government are doing in terms of health policy and how that comes out through his organization in the nonprofit sector. He had to say about the program that it was an absolutely fantastic program that will not only develop you as an individual, but also give you develop you in a professional capacity. He says this because any meeting he goes to, he tries to sell Charity Works as a program because he wants to see it expand. And he tries to emphasize that it's a program that gives graduate an opportunity to enter a sector that's notoriously difficult to get involved with. We talked about this a little bit at the start of the presentation, that actually the nonprofit sector, often it's finding a clear route in. And what Charity Works provides is a really strong graduate level entry into that sector. And you can read a little bit more about what Femi has to say about Charity Works on the Charity Works blog. And more about that, I'm going to send out in a follow-up email at the beginning of next week. So that's Femi, and you can find lots of other interesting blog pieces from current and previous Charity Works fellows. So let's talk a little bit about the recruitment process, because this is what people want to know about. So let's talk about what we're looking for in the program. So first up, we're looking for anybody that has their first degree that is a 2-1, expected or achieved. So many of you will be final year students. So we'll be looking at your expected qualification. Some of you will have already graduated, in which case we'll be looking to make sure that you've achieved a 2-1. Master's graduates are welcome to apply as well. And we're not looking for any specific degree disciplines. I think this is really important. The nonprofit sector as a whole needs numerate and analytical graduates as much as it needs graduates from humanities, from arts and political science. We're not looking for any specific degree discipline, just looking for a 2-1. There are actually mitigating circumstances around that. So if there are some genuine mitigating circumstances around why you haven't achieved or are not expecting to achieve a 2-1, such as you've been dealing with a long-term health condition that's had an impact despite some of the reasonable adjustments that have been put in place, or any other reason, if you're not sure, please email us info@charity-works.co.uk. And that information will be at the end of the session as well. And you can outline your mitigating circumstances to us, but otherwise we expect to see a 2-1. We're also looking for anyone that has demonstrated a commitment to social change. This is hugely important. So the Charity Works program is for emerging leaders in the sense that we don't actually require you to have any given experience working for a charity in a particular type of role. It's very much for emerging talent, but we need to make sure that you're keen and have a passion for social change in some of the things that you've done in the past. So what we're looking for really is experience of voluntary work or a commitment to social change that you may have demonstrated through a project or society at university. Potentially you've had caring responsibilities for an elderly relative or for somebody else within your family or outside your family. These are all opportunities for you to evidence that you have a commitment to social change. It's something really important to us, and it's what we're looking for when we are assessing applicants. We're also looking for people that demonstrate competencies which are shown on the screen in front of you. They're also freely available on the website. And one of the things that I would highly recommend that you do, you can open an application. You can open an application as soon as the webinar has finished. In fact, I'd actively encourage you to get your application at least open. When it comes to answering the competency-based questions, remember that we're looking for these competencies, and they are freely available to look at on the website, and a little bit more about that in a moment. So we're looking for people with a beneficiary or customer focus. We're looking for candidates that can communicate with impact, that can build positive relationships, that can demonstrate or have demonstrated in the past resilience. We're also looking for people that are results-driven, very innovative and entrepreneurial, adaptable under changing circumstances. And one other really important thing that we like to pull out and to make you aware of is that we're looking for people that are committed to their own personal development. The CharityWorks Leadership Development Program, the people that make the most out of that program are the people that get involved with as much as they can. And your commitment to personal development is important because so much of it is about you developing into an emerging leader, you reaching fellowship status at the end of the program. And in order to do that, you have to be committed to want to develop as an individual in a personal and also a professional capacity. So let's talk a little bit about the recruitment process overall, what that looks like. Well, the first things first will be the online application form. So you go to charity-works.co.uk/apply. More details to follow up at the end, so you don't have to remember that or write that down at the moment. You will be invited to submit an application form, which will consist of competency-based questions and some information about you. You will then, after completing the form, within a week or two, potentially a little bit longer, be invited to take our online tests. The online tests that we have are bespoke. And we've done our very best to make sure that those tests do not cause any bias against minority groups or against people with disabilities. If there is a reason why the online tests are a barrier for you, particularly if you have a specific disability, please, like I say, email us and let us know. There are no numerical tests involved at all. And every time I say that on campus, the relief that is on a graduate's face is unbelievable. But actually what we use are situational judgment tests, and that's essentially us looking to see how you would respond in a given non-profit kind of situation, how you would respond in that situation to see if you're a right fit for the program. And also there's a verbal reasoning test in there as well, which is about you looking at some key information and drawing key points from that, being able to reason verbally. As well as the online test. So if you are successful in the online test, your application will be looked at and shortlisted and marked depending on the criteria that we look at for our competencies. And if you are successful at that point, you would be invited to an assessment center. Assessment centers, believe it or not, on the CharityWorks program are actually really enjoyable experiences. Perhaps I am a little biased because I've not gone through one, but I've had the pleasure of assessing people. But the general feeling at assessment centers is a very positive and encouraging environment where people want to see each other do well. Assessment centers involve various group exercises and also a panel-based interview. And then if you are successful at that stage, we would make you a program offer. And it is at that point that you are made an offer to join the CharityWorks program, and that we start looking at placement matching and undergoing the placement matching process, which is us and you working together based on the preferences that you've given us to find the right fit for you in terms of role, in terms of location, in terms of the organization. We definitely make that a two-way process. This isn't about us telling you this is where we've got a placement for you, like it or lump it. It is not about that at all. It's about working very closely with you to find matches in your interests, in your experience. And we work very, very hard to do that, although we do ask that trainees can be as open-minded as possible. It's best not to come into the process with one charity in mind, one particular role in mind. Often it's really helpful to us if you can be as open as possible, particularly if you have limitations around location, for example, then it obviously limits the number of organizations that we can place you at. But just to be assured that the placement matching process is not wholly prescriptive, it is definitely a two-way conversation. I'm going to guess that Freya's probably getting a few questions about placement matching, so they might come up again a little bit later in the Q&A at the end. So what I want to do next is actually give you a bit of support in terms of your application form, and actually some of the support I'm going to give you and some of the tips that I'm going to talk to are really useful for the panel interview stage as well. So even though you might think, okay, my panel interview at an assessment center seems a long way off, really important to bear these in mind, and they're certainly really relevant for the application form stage as well. So some of this will appear to be very common sense, but you will not believe the amount of times that I wonder whether people have actually thought about this in advance of submitting their application. Your application is a great chance to get down the experiences that you have and your relevance for the program. One of the things that I think some prospective applicants find difficult is articulating that. So what I want to go over is some of the things that will help you to be able to do that. Number one rule, please know what's being assessed in advance. So you can't know the assessment criteria. Of course, it wouldn't be a very fair assessment, but you can go to our website where you can learn about the kind of competencies that we're looking for in a candidate. You can also get a sense of the values of the CharityWorks program and CharityWorks as an organization as a whole. And what I would caution you to do is when you are considering our competencies, when you're answering questions, make sure your answers are authentic to you. I think if you try and shoehorn competencies into your answers because you think that's what we're looking for, is where things will start to go wrong. So definitely have an awareness of those competencies, but please consider being as authentic as you can and make sure that the answers are a good reflection of you. This is a huge one, and you won't believe how many times this doesn't happen, is answer the question. Seems like really common sense, but make sure that you answer the question in full. So be particularly wary if a question has multiple parts to answer them. Some people can give fantastic answers, but then they don't go on to answer a second part of a question. And as a result, we can only allocate marks for what is there in the question. So an answer that isn't fully scoped, it doesn't answer all parts of those questions, won't score well. And you're only being marked against the criteria if you address the question being asked. So try not to impress with a whole bunch of things that you've done thinking that actually that's going to be a fantastic answer. Try and be really careful in how you're answering the question to make sure that you are addressing what the question has asked. One of the most common techniques that is really, really useful, and we ask all our trainees to do this. We do this on our other ventures, some of the other programs that we run as well, is to consider the STARE approach. So the STARE approach is basically outlining the situation. So giving a bit of context to the situation before you then tell us what the task was, what you were tasked with. Then going on to tell us the action that you took. Please make sure this is the action that you took. So if you are working as part of a team, we want to know what you have done specifically. And I think some people often pick examples thinking that actually this example might impress, but when it comes to writing what they did, they're leaning really heavily on what the team did as a whole, potentially because it isn't a great example of something that they did personally. If that's the case, I think it's far better to pick an example where actually you've had a part to play and you can really draw out the action. Please tell us the result as well. Please don't leave us hanging with the end of without the end of the story. We love to know then what the result is. That result isn't always positive, and actually sometimes it is positive. It's nice to have a positive result in there, but sometimes it's also nice to highlight learning points, which moves on to the final part, and that's evaluation. So the poorest answers will tell us the task, and then they'll tell us that the action that the person took. The really poor answers will then say what the team did rather than what you did as an individual. Good answers will then do the things in green as well as the things in yellow. That's they'll outline and contextualize the situation and also give a result at the end. And the absolute best answers that we see also have an evaluation point at the end. So that's an opportunity for you to reflect, to summarize in a piece of learning that you took away. Fantastic as well if that learning is actionable. So, you know, you learned something from what you went through. It was a positive experience. You took something away from things that you could have done better, and actually you applied that somewhere else. So think about actionable learning at the end when you're wrapping up your questions, and always bring that answer back to the relevance of the role you're applying for. I'm going to use the word role. You won't know specifically what your role is. So when you're thinking of role, think about the role as CharityWorks graduate trainee. So bring it back to the relevance of the fact that you're applying for the CharityWorks program, not just anything in particular. Also, we would really encourage depth in individual answers rather than breadth, but think about breadth in terms of your experiences across questions. And what I mean by that is you can draw from multiple experiences across the number of questions that you'll have to answer, whether that's at university, whether that's through things you've done in a society, whether that's through volunteer work. Those are a good breadth in terms of the answers that you can give. But when you're answering a specific question, try and limit yourself to one or perhaps two examples. So be broad in drawing from different experiences in terms of different questions, but in terms of individual questions, think about one or two examples. And the reason for that is some people tend to ream off a list of things they've done as if, you know, that's going to impress. And actually what it's doing more than that is limiting the ability for you to maximize the marks on the questions. So the new situation and the new tasks, and actually they're using up their word limit because they're explaining them time and time again, different situations and tasks, and they're not getting to the meat of the STARE technique, which is expanding on those tasks and actions to include situation and result and also evaluation. So go into detail about what you've learned or what you've developed as having gone through that task, that situation. And one thing I would really caution is never undervalue your experience. Where we're not looking at, great if you've had experience working for a national charity and something you think might be really impressive and really useful to your application, but don't undervalue experience that you think doesn't sound particularly impressive, because actually it might be a really good chance for you to demonstrate some of the competencies that we're looking for. So write with confidence, and definitely choose your example carefully. We'd rather see a well-crafted answer from a solid example than strain to find marks in an example that you might think would impress. So that's particularly about depth. Again, really useful for an interview as well. One thing you'll have to answer as part of your application is that you might want to be thinking about why you want to be on the CharityWorks program in the first place. It's a really common question in lots of graduate recruitment processes. But one thing I'd highlight is think carefully about what in particular about the CharityWorks program that interests you, and also think about how the role, so the role of being a CharityWorks graduate trainee, bearing in mind what you know, is right for you now, so at this point in your career. So we want you to build in a narrative as an applicant. Let us know why it's the right opportunity for you at this point and show how your experiences and knowledge make that it the right opportunity for you now. Some people will just tell us why it is, but they won't tell us why it is at this point in your career. Also think about, in terms of the experience of being on the program, where that might lead to. We love to see people that are thinking about their personal development, so think about what your goals may be going forward in the future. So think carefully about why you want to apply for the program in the first place. I think it's a really good thing to think about even before you start your application, because you don't want to spend that time and effort if you don't think it's the right fit. But if you are interested in social change and do have a passion for the nonprofit sector, then it's definitely something that we want you to consider. Online tests are really challenging to provide supportive information for. So what I would say is that please relax before you sit the test. People often worry about them a lot. Please don't. The verbal reasoning test itself is just us asking you to understand written information and draw some reasoned conclusions from it. And the situational judgment test is really an opportunity for you to tell us the course of action you would take in a given situation in the nonprofit sector. Please answer these as honestly as possible. I've often myself gone through situational judgment tests where I've answered what I think somebody wants to hear as the right answer, and in actual fact, it hasn't served me very well during the process. If you answer honestly, it really just helps us to determine whether or not the CharityWorks program is the right fit for you, and actually whether or not the program is a fit for us, for you being on it, as well as the right fit for you. And don't be discouraged. These tests are purely just for us to determine if you're going to be able to make the most of the program. It's a great opportunity for you to get a feeling of whether or not the program is good for you too. So yeah, my overarching advice is try not to worry too much about the online tests. I'm just going to very quickly check that the text box is rolling. It is, so you can all still hear me. That's great. And no, there are not numerical reasoning tests, Caitlin, as Freya has just answered. And the tests are timed, yes. But as Freya says, yes, quite lenient in terms of that time. In fact, very lenient in terms of that time. It's probably worth me pointing out as well that the application form isn't timed, so you can take your time with that, and I would advise you to go ahead and open an application form potentially as soon as when you finish the session. So let me move away from that chat box because Freya seems to have that all in hand, and let's go on to talk about assessment centers. So it might seem quite early to be doing this, to be thinking about assessment centers, but they will soon roll around if you are successful through the application process and through the online tests. So here's some sort of general tips and advice that we have around assessment centers. Basically, the first thing and one of the most important thing is for you to be yourself. We notice, and some of the employers that we work with that are there assessing you on the day, we notice that authenticity, and we're quick to see if you are sort of playing up to a role. Don't feel like you need to. The leadership development program is not about you trying to play an archetypal leader. People lead in very different ways, so please feel free to be yourself during the process. We will notice that authenticity. Also be aware that assessment center, so it's a day-long assessment center. And whilst you're being assessed through specific activities, also just be mindful that assessment's likely to go on all through the day. Whilst we're not assessing you on specific things as you're not taking part in activities, as assessors, we do notice things and we do talk and we do think about who would be the right fit for the program. So please don't do anything radically radical on the day that you might think might not go down so well. But yeah, just be aware that essentially assessment is going on throughout the day. Be mindful of your overdone strengths. I think this is crucially important. So some people will come to an assessment center and they're naturally confident in those situations. They thrive in dealing with people that they've never met before. And that's great. And we would want that to come out during the exercises that you're taking part in. But I think an overdone strength to confidence then is being overpowering in group sessions. So what I would say is if that is your strength, be really mindful of to counter the tendencies of being overpowering. Equally, if you're less confident, a leader and people on leadership development programs are not just the ones that stand up and take control of a group and put forward every idea going. That is not what a leader is. Leadership comes in all shapes and sizes. If you are less confident in that respect, then find a way to intervene in a discussion to actually make a contribution. Potentially some really great applicants we see are really thoughtful and reserved, and then they come forward with some of the best ideas and actually they're contributing that quality over quantity. But again, a kind of overdone strength way of being is that you are too shy to come forward with anything and that you kind of fade into the background, and we want to make sure that you play a part in group exercises and really come out and show us who you are during the assessment process. So I think that's really important to consider. Also, stay relevant in assessment exercises. So if group activities just are not your cup of tea at all, then try and take on a role as the task manager or the timekeeper. Make sure that you're relevant in the exercise and able to contribute, even though it might not be your strength in that kind of situation. Use the day to network as well. So actually get to know your fellow candidates. There is obviously an element of competition going on here because there are a limited number of placements and we're looking for the best graduate talent that we can get. But at the same time, in the nonprofit sector and on our program, we've seen this time and time again, candidates coming through that are really supportive of each other. You might be working with them in the future. You might be working on joint projects together. You might they might be in a position to support you with something going forward in the future. They might have insights and advice that they can share with you to help you relax. So please take your time to network and chat to people on the day. Our assessment centers are really built so that you're able to do that, so you don't feel like you're just going from one assessment to the next, that you're having an opportunity to talk to people. And when you get a room full of people who are really super excited about making a difference and social change, it really shows, and you will come into your element, I think, being involved in an environment like that. And I would say prepare as well. So think about things that you want to ask assessors, potentially before you actually get to the assessment center stage. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions in an interview. So I've had the privilege of being able to interview candidates before, as well as look at application forms, incidentally, and some of the group activities. And some of the best candidates will ask really interesting questions. Ask something that you actually want to hear the answer to as well. Don't feel like you have to ask a question because you feel like you ought to ask a question. So you answer a really sort of, typical assessment style question. Ask something that you really want to know, whether that's about the person who's interviewing you, or about the general direction of the sector as a whole, or about the specifics about the program itself. That's fine. Please don't ask us what the sickness absence policy is like during the interview process. Is probably not a smart idea, and it does happen from time to time. There is a time and a place, naturally, of course, for you to ask about things like that. Just the panel interview is probably not the best place to do it. So that's a really great way, I think, to help prepare you for the assessment center process itself. And no, there will not be psychometric tests during the assessment center. There will be group exercises and there will be individual interviews. But yeah, you will not be, and also a written exercise will take place. But yes, that is the case. No psychometric tests within that. So last point on general tips for assessment centers, we're coming up to around about 10 to now, is that always think about how you're conveying your fit for the program. So if this was any job, you'd be trying to convey your fit for the role. In the case of the CharityWorks program, you're trying to convey your fit for the CharityWorks graduate trainee. And there's plenty of information on the website in terms of our competencies. I've talked plenty tonight about what we're looking for in a trainee: commitment to social change, a willingness to drive their personal development. We're looking for those things. So try making sure that you're always conveying your fit for the role in particular. It's not about showing how good you are, full stop. It's about you showing how good you are for the CharityWorks program and how it's a great fit for you at this time. Something I would really, really take away from the presentation. So what I wanted to do now is to shift to the Q&A. There'll have been lots of questions being asked, and I think it's a great time now, with around about 10 minutes left of the session, to talk through some of the most common questions that have come up. So I've now just pulled up the chat box, and I can see we've still got around about 100 people watching, which is great. So yeah, it would be great, Freya, if you could pull out some of the most common questions that have been asked and paste them in there. I will try and pick up on some of the questions that are being asked as well. Emily asks, is the written exercise just mentioned something we'll be able to prepare for or plan for beforehand? The answer is, to the written exercise, no, there is one exercise that you may be able to plan for beforehand. The written exercises are not, I wouldn't be particularly worried about them in terms of preparation. They are things that you can answer from the experiences that you've taken place of on the day. So yes, first question in the Q&A, one of the big things that has been asked is choice of role and preferences taken into consideration. That doesn't surprise me. It's one of the common questions that comes up on campus. So what I would like to emphasize again is that placement matching is a two-way process. So in terms of the choice that you have, you will have an opportunity to indicate to us, firstly in a form, but then you'll also have an opportunity to talk to members of the CharityWorks team about the kind of placement that you're looking for. So you'll be able to give us an idea of where you're restricted in terms of location. Again, we ask you to be as open-minded as possible, but inevitably there'll be some parts of the country that you are unable to relocate to. You'll also get to give us some information about the preferences as to the type of roles that you would be interested in. And you'll also be giving us some experiences that you have, which might help us to match you to a role. Then what happens during the placement matching process is essentially we group trainees together alongside similar interests, and we let you know where the kind of interests that you've been grouped into. It's an opportunity for you to tell us whether you think we've got that right or not. More often than not, we've got a good sense of the kind of organization you want to work for. And then eventually we will put forward to you a placement where we think you'd be a good match. You still have an opportunity to talk to us about that. We're not forcing you into a placement in particular, but it's incredibly important that you remain open-minded, I think, during the process. So I think that kind of outlines placement matching in a general sense. If you want to follow that up with any more specific questions, definitely send us an email and I'll see what I can do in terms of following that up. Number 2 was career progression into other sectors in particular. So Freya, I take it that the question around that was, where do you stand if you want to move into the private sector, for example, towards the end of the program? Is that what we're thinking? I'll let Freya answer that question that I've thrown back at her in the chat box whilst I pick up on number 3. Does degree type affect eligibility? No, it doesn't. So irrespective of the type of degree that you have, and I mean, by that I mean subject, but I also mean whether or not it's a first degree, whether or not it's a postgraduate qualification, it doesn't make any impact on your eligibility. So you are as eligible for the program, whether you are just about to graduate with a 2-1 in maths as much as you are in an arts or humanities subject, in politics as much as you are in geography. That really doesn't matter. And also as much as if you have a master's or even a PhD. And we do see both apply for the program. You will be assessed based on your application independently of your qualification. So to go back to question 2, Freya has just sent me a message to let me know that I was along the right lines when I was thinking about career progression in other sectors. So essentially what the program is doing is it's a really strong leadership development program, full stop. Whether or not you then remain in the nonprofit sector or not, clearly it gives you a really great solid grounding in the nonprofit sector. You're working at a nonprofit organization, you are being developed as an emerging leader within that space, but actually the skills are super transferable. These are skills that any sector value, and hugely so. I mean, nonprofit organizations are often working with private sector organizations as well. Going through a leadership development program, even if you come to the end and get a sense that actually the nonprofit sector wasn't quite the right fit for you, or potentially it is, but in a few years' time you might want to move into the private sector, the leadership development program provides you with a really good stronghold of having those transferable skills and training, and really they're underpinned then by strong ethical values. And I think what you'll find more and more moving into the graduate recruitment market in other sectors is that more and more schemes, even in the private sector, are looking for graduates that have a strong ethical sense of corporate and social responsibility, and the Charity Works program enables you to come at that with a really kind of strong ethos. And these are things that our employers are looking for irrespective of the sector. So I hope that answers your question for career progression. We did 3, which was degree type eligibility. So 4 is quantity and type of experience. So the Charity Works program is open to people irrespective of you having experience or not. It's more about the quality of the experience that you've had. If you've had one very small voluntary role, but in actual fact, you're able to demonstrate the competencies that we're looking for, you will score very well through the process. If you don't feel like you've had anywhere near sort of any experience at all with the nonprofit sector or volunteering, and you feel like you can't evidence social commitment to social change, now is a great chance to start doing that. If you're really committed to the program, applications are open until the end of February. You do have an opportunity to do that. But what I would stress is that actually it's not about the quantity of experience. It's not about, basically, if you have done a year abroad and you've worked with an international development charity, equally as much as somebody who has worked for a couple of months for a society running events, and actually they were supporting people that otherwise wouldn't get access to to an event. Those are both examples of experience, and that won't impact on, I mean, it may have an impact in terms of you talking through interview, in terms of your qualifications and how you feel prepared for a role, but equally we see people on the program with very little experience as much as we see people that have really solid experience behind them. It's about the quality of that experience more than it is the quantity of that experience. So yes, hopefully that's answer number 4. 5 visas, really popular question. So to give you a kind of summary of the situation around visas, CharityWorks cannot sponsor you through a visa. You need to be able to have the right to work in the UK during the period of your placement, which will be September 2017 to September 2018. So what that means is we can't provide tier 2 visas. You'd be employed directly by the partner charity, but we can't provide tier 2 visas because the UK threshold for pay on that is higher than the actual salary band for CharityWorks, which means that you need to be looking, if you are an international student and you are still interested, you may be interested in exploring options in terms of tier 5 for having extended leave. There are specific rules around that for specific countries. I would highly advise you to go onto the government website around visas. And I'll try and articulate that a little bit better in a Q&A follow-up that'll go out after the session. But the general answer around visas is that we cannot sponsor somebody through a visa. Mr. 2-1, if you have extenuating circumstances as to why you missed it or mitigating circumstances you think might be relevant, please let us know in an email. Please email us info@charity-works.co.uk and we can follow that up. But on the whole, 2-1 is the threshold and benchmark that we look for. So if there aren't any mitigating circumstances and you just didn't achieve a 2-1, then unfortunately you wouldn't be eligible to apply. Number 6, was there a question number 6 or were there 5? So that was 6 and I did 5, which was visas. So Freya, I'm going to give you the opportunity if you want to put forward any more questions. Otherwise, before we bring the session to an end, because we've just hit 7 o'clock now whilst people are still here, let's see if I can follow up with any of the other questions. All the placements are in the UK. Okay, Freya, I've got that one. I'll follow that up in a minute. All the placements are in the UK, but we do have placements with international development charities. So what I would say to people that are interested in traveling abroad is you wouldn't be able to do that with your placement on the CharityWorks program. But of course, remember, CharityWorks is a leadership development opportunity for developing emerging leaders in this sector. So it's a great opportunity, even if you spend your 12-month placement at CharityWorks and develop those skills on the CharityWorks program. At the end of the 12 months, there's nothing stopping you from applying to work for a charity that potentially has work that is elsewhere globally. We can't promise that that will happen, of course, but CharityWorks provides that really solid foundation for you to be able to go on and work within the non-profit sector elsewhere. So I hope that's kind of helpful on that one. Yes, there are multiple assessment days. I can't remember how many we had last year, but it pretty much hit double figures, or it was close to it. Assessment takes place across the UK. We haven't finalized where that will be, but last year it was London, lots in London, Edinburgh and Manchester. Yes, Manchester. We were in Birmingham as well, if I remember rightly. In fact, I was assessing in Birmingham, so I don't know why I forgot that one. What else? So some of the placements, we do have some rotational placements where you will be moving between within an organization, but between roles. For the most part, they are fixed placements. So you'd have an individual job to be doing, working on a specific project or within a specific role. Let's have a look. So yes, definitely in terms of transferable skills, be thinking really carefully about transferable skills and be thinking, if an organization doesn't match what you're looking for in terms of, I don't know, you want to work overseas at one point or you want to be doing something very specific, remember the CharityWorks program is about leadership development and it's about developing you so that you have those transferable skills and skills within that sector to move on to different roles, although many will stay within the roles in which they're working on the program. A point on salary. So we haven't released the information about the salary for this year, but partly because by September 2017, that will have changed. So CharityWorks is committed to being a living wage employer. And by living wage, I don't mean the government's national living wage, which is not a living wage, but the living wage as indicated by the Living Wage Foundation. So the salary equivalent last year was equivalent to £8.25 an hour outside of London and £9.40 an hour inside. That worked out at around about 16,000 outside, so UK-wide, and £18,330 inside of London. The living wage will go up in November. So thoughts around that are, presuming that we are still paying at a living wage, the salary will be somewhere in the region of 17 to 19, depending on where you're working. But more information will be released about the salary, and we'll be able to give you a firm commitment on salary in the coming months. Part of that is to see what the living wage does in November when they refresh it, so very much in a few weeks, and partly in terms of setting our salary bands with the Charity Works board, and that's so that every trainee gets paid the same on the program, irrespective of the role that they are doing. I think in terms of questions, I would say that's us probably done. Freya, are there any other key questions that have come out of this session? Because I'm more than happy to stick around to follow up. For the most part, if you don't have any further questions, all I would say to follow up to that is that you can apply for the Charity Works program right now by visiting charity-works.co.uk. Even if you're not quite set to write the written responses to the competency questions, please open an application, because it's a great opportunity to get on our system and get ready to do that. And I'll be following up with some information about the program in the coming weeks as well. You can follow us on Facebook. We often put a lot of information on there. That's Charity Works UK. You can follow us on Twitter at Charity Works UK. We're also available on Instagram, Charity Works UK again. And if you want to email about any questions that you don't feel were sufficiently answered, you can email info@charity-works.co.uk, and somebody with the team, probably Freya actually, will pick those up. But like I say, I'm going to follow this up by sending around an email next week with answers to the Q&A questions, particularly if we've missed any in the text chat, and also to send the slides round so that you have access to the slides in case you haven't felt like you've made comprehensive notes, and also to signpost you to the recording as well. So with that, I'd like to wish you all the best with your application. We're going to end the session here unless I've got follow-up questions. So what I'm going to do is, just for the next 5 or 10 minutes, keep an eye on that box that Freya is following up with. If you do want to stick around to see if questions are being asked that you find interesting, you're more than welcome to. If not, I wish you all the best with your application, and thank you very much for attending tonight. Thanks again. Thanks, Laura. I'm really pleased that you felt that way. And there is not a limit. So if you're asking, India, if you've applied before, if you have applied before, you are more than welcome to apply to the program again. It will make no difference to us in terms of looking at your application. So your application will be looked at independently of any previous application. So you'll be on an absolute evening playing field with anybody else. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Lisa, Samuel, Emily, Anthea, Sarah. Wish I hadn't started now because there's so many of you. And another Freya there as well. Thank you very much, guys, and all the best with your application. Let's scroll up for questions, additional questions. Let's see. If you're unable to attend an assessment day due to unforeseen circumstances or do not progress any further in the process, will that have any negative impact on future applications? No, Becca, it won't. Applications are looked at independently, and we don't tie up applications if you've applied before. So if you've done it before and you got so far through the process, we actually had a trainee last year and had a number of trainees who have applied before, have not been successful, then have gone away and applied again. I think what a great example of somebody who's really resilient and committed to social change. So I would more than welcome your application to the program. Limit to application numbers, I think we've just covered that. Let's have a look. Great. I think that looks like all the questions. I can see the numbers are dwindling now. Freya, I know that you have to leave now, so thank you very much for your help. I know you've been fantastic at answering those questions. Really great. And I will follow up with you tomorrow. So thank you very much, Freya. And yeah, I think that will be the end then, guys. So thank you very much for attending. Please head on over to apply at the Charity Works website. Stick /apply in front of that Charity Works address to take you straight to that page. And if you have any other questions, please follow up by sending us an email. So once again, guys, have a great evening, and thanks again for your time. Take care.